One human, one queen, and one strand of DNA. A single touch could alter the fate of all humanity. If such power rested in your hands, would you choose salvation or disaster? I remember the Tuesday perfectly because it was the kind of day that should have come with a warning label. Mild drizzle, traffic jams that made you question humanity's collective sense of direction, and my cat, Mr. Whiskers, staring at me like he knew all my secrets and judged me accordingly. I was trudging through the muddy path behind the lab when the sky split in a way that made me squint so hard I worried I might summon a migraine straight into orbit. A craft descended, or rather, drifted elegantly, as if the laws of physics had decided to take a personal day, and parked itself in the middle of a cornfield, right between two particularly judgmental stalks. It shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting every droplet of rain in miniature, distorted rainbow prisms. I swore I heard a tiny cymbal crash, though that could have been my imagination or the coffee finally rebelling against me. I approached cautiously because logic said, maybe run, but curiosity, plus the faint, ridiculous hope that someone had finally invented a machine that could make toast perfectly, propelled me forward. The hatch opened with the subtlety of a sigh, and she stepped out. She could have been human, except for the long, tapering ears that seemed to capture light, wind, and probably minor cosmic secrets. Her eyes had the soft brilliance of distant galaxies, and there was a smile that suggested she knew every joke in the universe and wasn't afraid to tell one. She didn't greet me with a weapon or a laser beam. She looked at me like I'd just spilled coffee on the wrong equation and laughed softly, which made me laugh nervously because who laughs in front of someone who can probably rewrite your DNA with a glance? "Hello," I said. My voice sounded embarrassingly like a foghorn. "Do you park here often?" Not my finest moment. She tilted her head, ears flicking with what I could only interpret as amusement. "I park where destiny calls," she said. Her voice was melodic, carrying undertones that reminded me vaguely of wind chimes negotiating with a very confused thunderstorm. "And destiny seems to have chosen you." I wondered briefly if she meant this literally, or if this was one of those moments where interstellar royalty said cryptic things that made humans feel both important and profoundly stupid. She reached into a small compartment on her wrist, technology that defied all my understanding of matter, energy, and probably tax codes, and handed me a crystalline vial. The liquid inside shimmered like condensed starlight, tiny sparks swirling lazily as if reluctant to leave their little universe. "This is my DNA," she said, "or at least the part that can rewrite human history. Handle it carefully." I coughed, nearly dropping it. Does it come with like a manual? Or, I don't know, a disclaimer?" She laughed, the sound like delicate bells echoing in a cathedral that had never existed, and the light in her eyes made me feel simultaneously like an ant and a chosen prophet. She explained, slowly and patiently, that her genome had evolved over millennia with a purpose I could barely comprehend. It contained sequences capable of altering human physiology, preventing catastrophic diseases, enhancing cognitive capacities, even nudging evolution in directions we'd only dared dream of. She had traveled light years to find someone who could make decisions with nuance, compassion, and, ideally, a sense of humor, because the alternative was letting the wrong people tamper with her genes, and frankly, she'd already seen what happened in a couple dozen intergalactic mismanagement cases. And me, I was the randomly selected, mildly clumsy human she'd settled on. Why me? She didn't say, but her ears twitched in a way that made me think it involved a cosmic lottery I hadn't even entered. The first attempt at handling the DNA was disastrous. I accidentally sneezed during the initial sample transfer, sending glittering strands of bioluminescent molecules everywhere. She sighed, amused but patient, and said, "Perhaps a nap first, or a less explosive sneeze next time." I promised, very solemnly, that I'd consult my antihistamines before any future procedures. She didn't laugh, well, not audibly, but the twitch of her ears suggested she found the notion delightful. From that moment on, she began instructing me in the delicate art of interspecies genetics, with humor threaded through every lesson. Sometimes she would point at my notebook and say, Are you certain that's a human chromosome, or did you just doodle a mustache on it? I had to admit, her teasing kept me sane amidst the existential pressure of potentially steering the course of human evolution. We worked in labs that looked more like art installations than scientific facilities. Liquid panels floated midair, pulsing with colors I didn't even have names for, and miniature drones hummed lazily, cataloging every molecular twist and turn. She had a way of explaining complex genetics in ways that felt almost like storytelling. I would attempt a joke, such as suggesting that if humanity had her ears, Wi-Fi congestion would be a thing of the past, and she would smile, ears quivering, and add, "Perhaps evolution favors both utility and aesthetic, though I suspect yours lean more toward comic relief." The tension of the work was enormous, certainly, but her humor made it manageable. Even when I almost triggered a containment alarm by misplacing a sample, she just tapped my shoulder lightly, long ears brushing against me, and said, "You may be human, but chaos seems to be your specialty." I grinned weakly, realizing she was entirely correct. As weeks turned into months, I began noticing subtle changes, not just in the samples we worked with, but in me. My reflexes sharpened slightly, my mind absorbed patterns faster, and sometimes, in the quiet moments, I felt a faint resonance when her presence was near. I chalked it up to sleep deprivation until she caught me staring at the swirling DNA cloud and said, "The connection is mutual, but do try not to faint into the centrifuge." Her jokes became a lifeline, grounding me in a reality that otherwise seemed too enormous, too fast-moving, and yet strangely intimate. I laughed, tried to make light of it, and she laughed with me. Together, we made a strange sort of family, a human who tripped over his own feet and an alien queen whose DNA could change everything. There was one evening, after another long day of delicate procedures, when I noticed her staring out at the stars, ears angled as if listening to music I couldn't hear. I joked that she must have cosmic Wi-Fi, and she tilted her head, the expression on her face both serious and teasing. "The universe has a sense of humor," she said, "but it often prefers subtlety over spectacle." I laughed, and she did too, ears twitching, and for a brief moment, all the weight of cosmic responsibility felt like a shared joke between friends. She trusted me with her genetic legacy, and I had no idea whether I deserved it. But I did know that as long as we could laugh, even at the most absurdly terrifying possibilities, we might just survive the challenge. And so, on that ordinary-turned-extraordinary Tuesday, amidst cornfields, falling rain, and a sense of destiny that smelled faintly of toasted coffee, my life shifted irreversibly. I wasn't just a human anymore. I was the caretaker of a force that could redefine our species. She smiled at me again, ears brushing lightly against the wind, and whispered, almost conspiratorially, "Ready to change history." I gulped, dropped my pen, and muttered, "I think so. Just don't make me sneeze again." She laughed, and for the first time, I understood that laughter might just be the key to handling a responsibility this enormous. And somewhere in the distance, the cornfield remained suspiciously ordinary, as if it had seen nothing at all. Days blurred together in a way that made me question whether time had decided to take a vacation, or if I had simply crossed some invisible threshold where every second carried the weight of cosmic consequence. The alien queen insisted we travel to a floating laboratory orbiting an uncharted planet, the kind of place that looked like it had been stitched together from stardust, glass panels, and misaligned planets that somehow held themselves in perfect balance. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the gravity adjustments, or the fact that my breakfast cereal floated away in lazy arcs every morning, but she seemed to think it was hilarious, ears twitching with every near miss of a rogue spoon. I tried to respond with witty banter, something along the lines of, "If I eat one more floating cornflake, I'll need a spacesuit just for my stomach." And she actually laughed, tilting her head in a way that made her long ears sweep through the air like elegant antennae. Somehow, her amusement made the bizarre physics of zero-G less terrifying. We spent hours working on the DNA sequences. Each strand she showed me shimmered like liquid mercury infused with nebulae, twisting in impossible loops, forming patterns I didn't fully understand but could feel in some part of my brain that had gone unused since puberty. I joked, half seriously, that it looked like my Aunt Linda's knitting had somehow merged with a black hole, and she actually considered the analogy, ears flicking thoughtfully. "There is a kind of chaotic artistry here," she said, and I had to admit she was right. It was as if evolution had decided to combine genius with aesthetic flair, and I apparently was the poor human chosen to appreciate it. Despite my inadequacies, our bond grew. I found myself laughing at her tiny observations about human life, like when she noticed that we had invented a device called a toaster that achieved nothing more than burning bread unless handled with extreme precision. "Your species dedicates considerable resources to appliances that turn food brown," she remarked, ears quivering slightly. "I find it charming." I snorted. "Yeah, and if you think that's weird, wait until you see our self-checkout lanes." She leaned in, long ears brushing against my arm, and whispered conspiratorially, "Perhaps your chaos is a form of genius after all." I laughed, unsure if I should be flattered or concerned. Our experiments were delicate and meticulous. I quickly learned that even the smallest misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Once, I accidentally mixed 2 strands of her DNA in the wrong sequence, and the entire containment chamber lit up like a miniature aurora. I panicked and she didn't scold me. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "It's a rare, beautiful mistake. Think of it as a cosmic wink." I blinked at her, wondering if she meant that literally, and her ears twitched in amusement. Somehow, every error I made became a lesson wrapped in laughter, which helped me keep the pressure from crushing my sanity entirely. Outside the lab, the galaxy unfolded in ways I had never imagined. Nebulas swirled like liquid gemstones, and distant star clusters twinkled with a mischievous glimmer, as if the universe itself was quietly observing our experiments and whispering jokes we could barely hear. The Queen often paused to observe, and I began to see a subtle humor in the patterns of planets, asteroid belts, and comets that danced by us. "You notice the irony," she said one evening, "of creating life-altering potential while tiny rocks float past us like inconsequential spectators." I chuckled. "Yeah, it's like the universe has front-row seats to our fumbling genius." She laughed softly, the sound carrying in the low gravity like wind chimes in a cathedral. Meals were another adventure. She had no need for food as humans understood it, yet insisted on sitting with me while I attempted to eat, as if it were some ritual of bonding. One morning, I attempted eggs in microgravity, and the yolk floated past her face. She caught it with a delicate movement of her hand and raised an eyebrow. "Precision is key in both nutrition and genetics," she remarked, ears twitching in mock seriousness. I laughed so hard I nearly inhaled a piece of scrambled egg, and she just shook her head, long ears swaying like elegant pendulums, clearly amused by my incompetence. During the long sessions of experimentation, our conversations drifted to deeper topics. She spoke of her civilization, of planets that orbited stars we hadn't yet discovered, of societies built on empathy rather than conquest. I listened, fascinated, and tried to interject jokes to ease the weight of such profound truths. "So, let me get this straight," I said, gesturing to a floating strand of her DNA. "You've been around the galaxy solving problems, and your entertainment is watching humans panic over spilled coffee." She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made me feel simultaneously like a child and an honored colleague. "One must appreciate all forms of chaos," she replied, ears quivering slightly, "especially those that are delightfully human." Her trust in me was growing, and I realized with a mixture of pride and terror that I was beginning to rely on her humor as a lifeline. When the pressure of potentially altering human history threatened to overwhelm me, she would lean close, her ears brushing against my shoulder, and whisper something lightly teasing. "Do not forget to laugh, human. The universe appreciates irony." I would laugh, and somehow the enormous weight of responsibility became manageable. We weren't just working together. We were navigating an absurd, high-stakes dance where every mistake could be catastrophic, yet every joke kept us grounded. One evening, while observing a particularly vivid molecular interaction, I realized something startling. The DNA strands weren't just sequences of nucleotides. They seemed to respond to intent, almost as if the molecules could sense thought and emotion. I gasped, and she raised an eyebrow. "Do not panic," she said softly, though I was certain her ears twitched in amusement. "The strands are intelligent in their own way. They respond best to clarity of purpose and occasional humor." I couldn't help but laugh, imagining tiny, sentient genetic strands rolling their eyes at my fumbling attempts. The deeper we delved into her genetic code, the more I noticed subtle changes in myself. Reflexes sharpened, thought processes quickened, and in quiet moments, I felt a strange resonance when she was near. It was as if a tiny thread had connected us across species, a shared understanding that went beyond spoken words or scientific protocols. I joked that we were bonded on a cosmic level, and she smirked, ears tilting in mock suspicion. "Perhaps," she said, "though I suspect the universe finds our little bond amusing." I grinned, realizing that her amusement was as much a tool as her genetic legacy, a reminder that laughter could coexist with responsibility. We began simulating the effects of her DNA on human cells, projecting outcomes that ranged from subtle cognitive enhancements to dramatic shifts in immunity and physical resilience. I occasionally quipped, "So, basically, we're turning humans into superhumans with a flair for comedic timing." She laughed, and I swear her ears twitched in delight. "Do not underestimate humor," she said. "It is as essential as any enzyme." In those moments, I realized the absurdity of our situation. A human and an alien queen, rewriting the potential of an entire species while joking about cosmic mishaps and floating breakfast. As the days merged into nights, the alien queen and I established a rhythm. She guided, I learned. Mistakes were celebrated with humor, and breakthroughs were shared with mutual astonishment. Every strand we analyzed, every simulation we ran, became part of a delicate dance that balanced chaos and precision. And in the quiet moments between experiments, I began to understand that this bond, part trust, part absurdity, part genuine connection, was as crucial to our success as the genetic code itself. There were nights when I would stare at the stars outside the floating lab and imagine the worlds that would exist because of what we were doing. She would join me, ears angled toward the celestial canvas, and sometimes we would whisper jokes about the absurdities of interstellar life. A rogue asteroid that looked suspiciously like a donut, or a black hole that seemed to blink at us in mock disapproval. It was these moments of levity that reminded me that even when tasked with changing the course of human history, it was the laughter we shared that kept me from crumbling under the enormity of it all. And as the lab lights dimmed and the floating drones hummed softly, I realized that the adventure was only beginning. I wasn't just a human trying to comprehend alien genetics. I was a partner, a student of humor and cosmic responsibility, navigating a world where mistakes were inevitable. Laughter was essential, and the fate of entire civilizations rested delicately in hands still learning how to steady themselves. The lab was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt safe. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears tingle, like the universe was holding its breath and waiting to see if we were competent or just spectacularly foolish. I stood there, staring at the containment chamber, the crystalline key still in my hand, its weight heavier than any object should be when measured in mere grams. The alien queen was beside me, calm as ever, ears tilted forward as though listening to a melody only she could hear. I joked because that was apparently my coping mechanism now. "Do you think history will remember me as a hero, or as the guy who almost sneezed humanity into oblivion?" Her lips twitched into a grin, ears flicking lightly. "Either way," she said, "your sense of humor will echo through the ages." I took a deep breath, realizing that the responsibility I had carried for months, the potential to rewrite the very blueprint of humanity, was now poised on the edge of execution. The decision itself was absurdly complicated. Not because I didn't understand the science. She had painstakingly explained every possible outcome, down to the smallest probabilistic ripple, but because every scenario came with consequences. Some changes were subtle, almost poetic. Enhanced cognitive processing in a fraction of the population, subtle improvements to immunity, minor genetic tweaks that might allow humans to adapt faster to environmental shifts. Others were dramatic, alterations to reproductive genetics the potential to accelerate evolution in ways that could change human behavior for millennia. I stared at the sequences projected in midair, neon strands twisting like living threads of a cosmic tapestry, and I realized with a combination of fear and awe that I was holding the scissors, and the universe was the cloth. We had spent countless days running simulations, arguing over minute adjustments, and occasionally joking about ridiculous outcomes. I had suggested, only half seriously, that one option could accidentally give everyone ears like hers, which she laughed at, and for a while I was mildly obsessed with the idea. She had said, "Human ears are adequate," but I could tell she was amused by the image of a world full of people with long, elegant, slightly judgmental ears. That humor had carried us through the tension, reminding me that even in moments where civilizations hung in the balance, laughter could be a compass. The moment arrived when the key had to be used. The chamber's interface glowed, responding to the crystal in my hand, humming with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I hesitated, feeling a strange duality of exhilaration and terror. She placed a hand, delicately long-fingered, impossibly graceful, on my shoulder. "Trust your judgment," she said, her voice a blend of encouragement and teasing, ears brushing against the top of my arm. "And remember, chaos is merely opportunity in disguise." I smiled, muttering under my breath, "Then I guess I'm about to become the most organized, chaotic human in history." She laughed softly, a melodic sound that carried a quiet power, and I felt my anxiety ease slightly, though not entirely. I pressed the key. The chamber's energy flared, strands of her DNA unraveling and flowing into carefully calibrated nanocontainers that would introduce themselves into the human population, but only in ways that were intended, controlled, and reversible. The process was mesmerizing. Light cascaded across the lab, twisting through the floating drones, reflecting in her eyes, which glimmered like a pair of distant stars. I felt a thrill, like standing on the edge of a black hole and realizing momentarily that you could jump and survive. The sequences began to integrate, adjusting and harmonizing with human biology in subtle, intricate ways. And for the first time, I understood what it truly meant to hold power. Not the kind of power that demands obedience, but the kind that inspires trust, empathy, and the courage to act responsibly. As the process continued, I watched small indicators in the simulations begin to shift. One by one, minor changes appeared. Humans developed slightly enhanced immune responses, subtle mental acuity improvements, a gentle inclination toward problem-solving that could transform societies over centuries. The results were almost poetic, not dramatic in a headline-grabbing way, but profound in their long-term impact. I joked quietly, "So, tomorrow we'll have everyone solving Sudoku faster." She tilted her head, ears twitching, and replied, "And perhaps learning to laugh at it too." I laughed, realizing that the humor we had carried through this ordeal was not incidental. It was essential, a part of the DNA of our collaboration itself. I glanced at her, and for the first time, I considered what I had learned about her civilization. It was sophisticated, patient, and wise in ways that humans rarely achieved. She had traveled light years, entrusted her genetic legacy to someone utterly unqualified in theory, and yet she had believed in me, not just as a human capable of following instructions, but as a partner capable of judgment, creativity, and yes, the occasional well-timed joke. That trust, I realized, was as transformative as the DNA itself. It changed me, shifted me from a man who stumbled through life into someone aware of responsibility, capable of thinking beyond immediate consequences, and able to balance gravitas with levity. The process finished with a hum, almost like a sigh of relief from the lab itself. The strands of DNA had fully integrated into the containment system, their energy now stable and harmonized with the sequences of human biology. I exhaled, dropping the key onto its holder with a clatter that echoed like a punctuation mark in the vast silence. She leaned lightly against me, her head tilted, long ears brushing against my arm, and whispered, "Well done. Humanity owes you a debt, though I suspect it will manifest in subtle ways rather than fanfare." I grinned, "So, no parades, just smarter humans." She laughed softly, the sound vibrating in the lab and somehow in my chest. We stepped outside the lab's observation deck to watch the galaxy stretch in all directions. Stars winked like cosmic eyes, and distant nebulae painted the void in colors that defied conventional naming. I joked about sending postcards to Earth explaining that humans had just leveled up a bit, and she leaned close, ears quivering with amusement. "Do not underestimate the ripple effects of small gestures," she said, eyes glinting. "Even humor carries through time." I nodded, understanding that our work, while monumental, was also a reminder of the elegance of incremental change, the balance between action and reflection, and the lightness one could carry even while holding the weight of history. As we returned to the lab to finalize data logs, I realized how much I had grown. I was no longer just a human fumbling through space and accidents. I was someone who could carry immense responsibility without being crushed by it, someone who understood the delicate interplay of power, compassion, and trust. I could joke amidst gravitas, smile through cosmic consequences, and respect both the absurdity and seriousness of the universe at the same time. The alien queen's presence had shaped me, but the journey had been mutual. She had shared her legacy, and I had learned to wield it with care, humility, and a measure of humor that made even the most terrifying scenarios manageable. Weeks later, as we prepared to return to Earth, I reflected on the subplots that had run quietly alongside the main story. The drones we had calibrated had become minor companions, buzzing around with gentle chirps that seemed almost like commentary on our experiments. The molecular strands of DNA had developed subtle responses to our work patterns, an echo of our personalities embedded in genetic code. Even minor missteps, a spilled vial, a floating coffee cup, an untimely sneeze, had taught lessons about adaptation, resilience, and the necessity of laughter. Nothing was wasted, and every moment had contributed to the final outcome, weaving a complex tapestry of cause and effect that extended beyond human comprehension. We departed the floating lab, and I glanced back one last time. The alien queen's eyes met mine, long ears angled in a gesture that felt like both farewell and reassurance. "Do not forget," she said softly, "that every civilization is built on trust, connection, and a touch of humor. Guard it well." I nodded, feeling the resonance of her words in every fiber of my being. "I will," I replied. "And maybe, just maybe, I'll remember to make toast correctly, too." She laughed, and I laughed, and for the first time I felt that the universe, immense, chaotic, and endlessly surprising, was not so terrifying after all. Back on Earth, life resumed with subtle shifts. People didn't notice the changes immediately. No headlines shouted, "Humans now superhumans." Instead, kindness, ingenuity, and problem-solving began to bloom quietly in small corners of cities, villages, and remote settlements. I walked the streets, still prone to clumsy mishaps, but with a new confidence, a sense of purpose, and a humor that felt like armor and gift at once. Humanity was evolving, yes, but not recklessly. The changes were guided, tempered, infused with compassion, and underscored with the laughter I had shared with someone who looked human, but carried a galaxy in her veins and wisdom in her long, elegant ears. And sometimes, in quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the trees or the stars peeked through clouds, I imagined her ears twitching somewhere in the cosmos, hearing my laughter,